Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to a Saturday edition of the Garden Report. Just 10 days from Celtics Media Day. We're getting into some training camp questions in the lead up to that, as well as some previews of the Celtics rivals coming into this year. A lot of East teams on deck. We're going to start with a team I just can't give up on, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And of course, when we talk Cavs, we talk to Justin Rowan from the Chase Down podcast. I hopped on Chase Down a week or two ago, and now here's Justin back on the Garden Report. Welcome in, Justin.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, we're doing the old podcast exchange. It's good to be back on the Garden Report and good to be talking about these teams, man. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here.
So, what's your confidence level going into this year in Cleveland? How's that compare to what your confidence level was going into last year? Running back, most of the same team. First round pick and Jalen Tyson, who I'm very excited about. Tristan Thompson's back, as well as the core four. Pretty much running it back here in full. Ty Jerome, who didn't get to play last year after coming in, hopefully going to be healthy for this year. Dean Wade back. He wasn't healthy for that Celtics Cavs series for the most part. So that's a big thing this year, health, right? You kind of predicted the disaster that last season was going to be health-wise, and now you're hoping that this season won't be that either.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident coming into this year, and I think part of it was it's hard for a season to go worse than it did last year. And the fact that everything did go wrong for the Cavs last year and they still managed to kind of achieve their macro goals for the season was encouraging because what they said at Media Day was they would like to go into the year and win a first round series. They wanted to be competitive against, the top teams in the league. They did that. And I thought considering who was available in the state they were in, Donovan Mitchell tried to give it a go against Orlando, was able to play through that series, played mostly through Boston, but then he just finally kind of gave out on him. And then Jared Allen with the broken rib. The fact that they were able to, push Boston and at least give them a couple tough games, given that state that they were in, I think it's encouraging because, obviously, I think Boston's in a tier of their own when it comes to this year. As the defending champs, I think they should be the favorites to repeat as champion. But in terms of the Cavs' ability to play them tough and give them a competitive series, you have to feel a little bit better than you did going into last year.
Yeah, and I'm glad they're running it back, as we talked about on your show. I think you deserve that as a team when you go through the injuries that they did and just want to see where it's at. I'll mention the coaching change too, because I do want to get into that. JB Bickerstaff out, who helped raise them up from the rebuilding stage to a playoff team back-to-back years. One of the best defensive coaches in the league, gave them an identity in many ways over his handful of years there. And now trying to shift more toward the offensive route under Kenny Atkinson. And he was so great in Brooklyn, obviously a part of those Warriors teams, the 2022 championship team out there. I think it's a good choice as far as replacements go. I don't always love, as I didn't love when the Celtics moved on from Brad. And, there was some difficulty, I'm sure, going from Ime to Joe, different circumstance. But I don't always love blaming the coach, but sometimes I get it. So where do you fall in terms of what Atkinson's going to bring and moving on from JB?
Yeah, I think when you listen to a lot of the reporting, kind of after the fact, there seemed to be a lot of indicators that the locker room was lost. And I think when, those voices reach an expiry date, you either have to turn over the roster or you have to turn over the coach. And when, you have a young group that does have room to grow internally, I don't think you're going to be moving on from them in favor of JB Bickerstaff. I think he was a terrific hire for Detroit and is going to do a lot of good things there. But, I didn't want to bring in, if they were to move on from JB, I didn't want to bring in a coach that had no experience. When you are trying to manage 4 all-star level talents and get them all implemented into a system, make sure that, everyone's happy, everyone's getting enough touches and things like that. That's a tough situation to walk in on its own, let alone one with expectations. The Cavs want to take another step forward. They want to make an Eastern Conference Finals. So bringing in a coach that has no experience, even if they're, a hot name on the coaching market, like Adrian Griffin, you saw how that could go as a new coach goes into that kind of a situation. So I think from Kenny's standpoint, the fact that he did have that Brooklyn experience as head coach, he got to learn from that experience, figure out what worked and didn't work. He spoke to that in his press conference of just kind of having more of an understanding of the collaborative nature of coaching in the NBA as a result of being in Brooklyn and then, being the associate head coach under Steve Kerr, being that associate head coach for a team that won a championship and working with, a locker room with a lot of personalities with Draymond Green, Steph, Clay, all of that, everything that they had to go through. So I think that kind of perspective and the experience that he gained from that is going to give him a leg up. We don't know how it's going to translate. You don't know, like, you don't want to just assume everything that worked under the old coach is going to work and the new coach is just going to be strictly additive. But I do think in terms of resume, he's probably the best candidate available.
Yeah, and stylistically, I do think there's some comparisons going in Boston's case from Ime to Joe, more of a defensive emphasis to more of an offensive emphasis, as well as going from JB, who was very heavily defense, to Kenny, who I think is probably going to have this team shooting more threes, probably going to change things up a little bit stylistically in terms of how they operate there. I'm interested to see how the ball handling allotment goes there. From what you can gauge right now, how do you think this team will look different stylistically this year?
I think there's just going to be a little bit less burden on Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell to initiate offensively. I do think they want to get Evan Mobley involved as that playmaker, utilize him at the nail, and even have him bring up the ball in transition. We saw more and more of that towards the end of last year, and I think he's going to continue to be empowered in that way. And really, like when you talk about building an offense around a two guard kind of set, that's not going to work. That's never worked historically unless there is a front court initiator on the offensive end. So often people talk about the defensive end when the defense hasn't been an issue for Cleveland in the regular season and playoffs. That defense has held up really well. They perform better defensively, even with just one big and the two guards, than Dallas did. Right? They outscored Boston with Garland, Mitchell, and Mobley on the court for that playoff series. But I do think offensively has been the issue. That's been where they've had the issues having that translate from the regular season to the playoffs. And unless you can have that front court initiator that can help beat a defense when it traps guards and do the kinds of things that you can do to a smaller backcourt, you are not going to be able to have that consistent offensive threat. So I do think, using more guys, more off-ball sets, getting easier looks, and just, less burden on Mitchell and Garland as a ball handler, maybe a few more spot up opportunities for them. I think the hope is that that's going to help that offense translate from the regular season to the playoffs.
Want to take a quick break before we get into some of the players over there, tell you about Rocket Money. What's Rocket Money? Well, can you name every single subscription you have? I know I can't name all mine, and I'm not alone. I just learned that over 74% of people have subscriptions they've forgotten about. Well, with Rocket Money, I don't have to remember every subscription and worry about forgetting any. Just signed up for one last night to watch a game. Month goes by, you're not sure you still have it. Well, Rocket Money lets you know what you've signed up for, what's on there, things you might have forgotten about. And it's all laid out right in front of you. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings, save all your subscriptions in one place and know exactly where your money's going. For any you don't want anymore, Rocket Money can help you cancel them. And another thing, they're going to offer you a deal to maybe stay on. Well, they'll help you figure that out too, which is always helpful. 5 million users save a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/garden. That's rocketmoney.com/garden, rocketmoney.com/garden. So which of the core four are you focused on going into this year, Justin? I did my all-time Celtics killers list this week. Went with top 100, some other offseason stuff. I was shocked to see Donovan Mitchell, third all-time in points per game against the Celtics with 29 a game. I think he had 31 in that series last year before he went down. Probably the most dangerous player they saw in their path. There aren't a lot of questions about him. I would think Garland, a little left to be desired there. I know he went through some injuries last year and dropped down, even on my list there, the top 100 list significantly based on how he played last year. Mobley's a guy I've wanted to see more from. And Allen obviously had the rib injury and took some steps last year before that. Who do you think's most important in terms of their growth, in terms of their trajectory, and this team being a contender next year?
Yeah, like you said, I think Donovan Mitchell kind of is who he is, and it's just going to be a matter of getting him more support, right? Like I think, he's had good playoff series, he's had bad playoff series. When you're talking about a star that's not a kind of like that LeBron tier, that's the way it's going to be. And if you're building around a player like that, you need to have other guys that are capable of stepping up and being the best player in a playoff series, right? If Mitchell is kind of that number two guy in a series where he just doesn't have the outside shot. Boston showed that even with a player of Jason Tatum's caliber, right? Like sometimes he's just not going to have it for a series, and you need to have guys like Jaylen Brown, Derek White, step up in the way that they did. So I think the obvious answer is Evan Mobley. Like I said, I think his growth as a playmaker and as an offensive hub is going to be incredibly important for them. Whether it's at the power forward position or whether it's at the center position. I think that kind of growth as a playmaker, using him as like a much taller Bam Adebayo, is probably the hope where this goes offensively. But that's going to take some time, right? Like he has played about half of his minutes over the last 2 years at center. He's played half of his minutes at power forward. I don't think it's as simple as, oh yeah, just kind of put him at the five and everything clicks. The lineup data has, that hasn't been the case. But I do think, Evan Mobley is the most important. And then Darius getting back to where he was last year. I know, as you said, with your own kind of personal rankings and whatnot, and his standing around the league that's dropped down. I think that was strictly to do with health, whether it was, the injury to his shooting hand to start last year and the hamstring. He finally kind of got right for about a month and was looking like, the normal 22-8 efficient version of Darius Garland that we saw. And then he broke his jaw and just wasn't the same
In
after that.
Boston.
Yes, yes. With Kristaps Porzingis' hip, and then coming back from that, I've seen medical reports and stuff like that that said after you fracture your jaw, it's going to take like 6 months before you start to get that strength back, even your ability to grip at the same level. The 15 pounds of muscle that he lost during that time, not being able to eat with the mouth wired shut. Like I think all of that had a big impact, and then you put on top of that a pretty significant and meaningful death in his family as well. It was just a year from hell from him. But I do think it's important to remember that 22-23, that first year with Donovan, was his best year individually. That was Donovan's best year individually. When you look at the lineup data with the two guards, they are significantly better on both ends of the floor, offensively and defensively, when both guards are out there. As I said before, the defense has held up very well. It's still been at an elite level with both guards on the court. It's just about getting it to work offensively. And to me, that should not be the question. Like, I don't think that, Garland and Mitchell getting it to work offensively in the playoffs, that shouldn't be where the concern is. And because of that, I just feel like there's meat left on the bone. And having someone like Kenny Atkinson that has experience dealing with multiple ball handlers and building a structured offense around that is going to put them in a situation to succeed.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the difficulty there is that it does work defensively, as we've seen. But I think a big reason for that, obviously, is that they have the two bigs out there, the two dynamic guys
Yep.
defensively in the front court. Do those guys work together offensively, though? Is that going to be something that, as time goes on here, is sustainable for both of those guys? Because obviously there's some reporting, maybe move on from Allen this
Yep.
offseason. They don't do that. Get an extension done with Mobley. So they're tied together for now. And certainly are two guys who are both two of the better bigs defensively in the league. And I like Allen's offensive game. It's gotten to a pretty good place. I like some of the creation ability you talked about there. He had a great game in Boston in that mini series, passing the ball that really surprised me. So I love where he's at, and he would have been a difference maker in that series. But him being out as the series progressed allowed Mobley to get going against, some of the more perimeter-based defense that the Celtics were throwing out there to try to limit the Cavs' threes. And I loved at the five what he was able to show in terms of being aggressive out there. Shot hasn't reached where it needs to be. And I've said this to you over and over again, Justin. He's still so young. There's still so much room for growth here. And now he has a new coach, which I think could be helpful. But in that combination, are you ever going to see the best version of Mobley offensively? Because I think he just has to get so much better on that end of the floor for him to become the player you want to build around and pay the kind of money that they've committed to.
Yeah, I think, that's one of the biggest questions. And like I said before, I don't think it's as easy as just moving Mobley to the five and that solves everything offensively. Like, it is important to remember, like, he did have those strong games offensively, the last two games of that series. But Jared Allen was out the whole thing. He was also out, games 5 through 7 against Orlando, and Mobley failed to score in double digits in all of those games, right? Like, I don't think it's that simple. Honestly, Mobley took off in that Boston series with Donovan Mitchell out, because
Yeah.
Garland in a limited state, he was basically kind of relegated to a shooting guard throughout the playoffs, where he just wasn't getting as many touches as he's typically accustomed to. And the thing we've seen when we talk about the fit of the big man Perry, those Mitchell and Mobley minutes for the last 2 years, they have a -2 net rating in those minutes and only a 115 offensive rating. Whereas Garland and Mobley, when it's just the two of them, have a +12 net rating. Like, those pairings work so much better. Mitchell and Allen work really well because Allen's a better screen setter and kind of more in the mold of like a Rudy Gobert that can catch and actually do things with the ball. So that's a good fit with Mitchell. We got to find a way to get Mitchell and Mobley those times when they are out there together. Find ways to build that chemistry similar to what he has with he and Garland. I'm not blaming it on Donovan Mitchell. Mobley's just a different archetype of big man. So I do think how Mobley grows offensively is important, but it's not strictly tied to what position he's playing. I do think that the development is needed regardless of where he plays. How they fit between he and Jared Allen, I think that's a bigger question. I'm less certain of it in comparison to Garland and Mitchell. They have worked well in the past. Like when you look at kind of the big man lineup data, they have a +6 net rating over the last 2 years when both big men are on the court. When it's just Mobley, it's +3. When it's just Allen, it's +4. So, they are better together. But how that translates to the playoffs is obviously the biggest question. And I think that pairing isn't going to work offensively unless Mobley improves as a playmaker and obviously improves as a shooter. But I do think that playmaking is more important because we have seen, power forwards that can't really shoot play next to non-traditional big men, or I should say traditional big men, and have it work offensively if that four can play make. Mobley made more threes and shot more threes than Zion has in his career last year. But Zion gets to play, in the past with like Jonas Valanciunas, who takes 1 3 every 3 games or whatever, right? Like that still worked offensively because Zion was a playmaking threat and he's able to get to the rim. I think the same thing can happen for Mobley. But obviously, like if that growth doesn't occur, then you have to look at other options. You have to probably look at a power forward that can stretch the floor and provide some rim protection to pair next to Mobley if that Jared Allen pairing doesn't work. But I do think, as you said, the playmaking has been there from Allen. He took a step forward there last year. They do have strong playmaking throughout the entire lineup. So I think there's a hope that Kenny Atkinson can make it work with limited spacing. You got to remember, he used a lot of those kind of lineups in Golden State as well, whether it's, non-shooters in Andre Iguodala, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, like all these guys, like they were able to still make it work offensively because of that structure.
Yeah, and they might be able to go to some non-traditional creation methods like you've talked to free up Mitchell Mothball a little bit more, Garland, those guys. And these are some bigs who can create a little bit, especially Allen. So it'll be interesting to see at those positions. But the real question is the wing, which we've talked about for years now. Put a lot of money into addressing it last year to mixed results. Jerome went down, obviously. Strus was fine. I feel like he was good in that he just gave steady production at that spot, which is more than what they had previously there. Didn't go great for him in that Celtics series. Then you go down the line, Jalen Tyson. Love that draft pick, as we talked about a lot on your show. Karis LeVert, still a guy who can play a little bit there. So they have a number of options. Even Niang, who obviously the defense didn't work out as you wanted it to. Wade gives you a good defensive option out there. So there's a ton of options. Even Amani Bates down the line, can he get into that mix? So there's a million different options here. Isaac Okoro is still in free agency. I'm interested to see how that's going to go. A lot of the reporting weeks ago was that maybe he's out the door in a trade, but there still hasn't been anything new there. So I don't know what's going to happen here for them at this wing spot because they have so many different options. You could even bring back Okoro, who's still pretty far south of that second apron if you wanted to. But, after 4 years, did you see what you needed to there in terms of the shot? And that's not going to work. It's tough when you have this many options and none of them are ideal, and it's such an important position. this might be their biggest question going forward. So what do you see happening with Okoro? What do you see happening with that wing spot this year?
Yeah, at this point, I'd be very surprised if there was a trade involving Okoro. I think that would have happened earlier in the offseason. Could be wrong. You know, you never know what opportunities are going to open up if, Brooklyn becomes more amenable to like a Cam Johnson trade. That might be something that they go with. But I definitely expect Max Strus to again start at the three. He was that guy last year from an impact standpoint. They were so much better with him on the court. And it was funny. We joked with Strus at Media Day where we were talking about, that your last year in Miami, you had so many games because of injuries without playing with a point guard. And that shouldn't be the case in Cleveland because, they got Darius Garland, we got Ty Jerome, we have Ricky Rubio. And by game 2, all three strings of point guards were out. And I do think, he showed a lot from a playmaking standpoint last year. He had to kind of sub in and play some point guard. He was playing some power forward as he did with Miami. But like the numbers were staggering when you look at how much better he was with DG versus when Garland was out. Like he shot 45% from the field and 39% from three in the games that Garland played. He shot 37% from the field and 29% from three in the games that Garland didn't play. Like that, it just goes to show you like kind of the level of playmaking that was absent and how much more work he had to do in those games. But again, it would be great to add a big wing. I would love to add a 4-3 to this lineup, or even a 4-5 would be really nice to have. Someone in the mold of like a Larry Nance Jr. I would love to bring him back. Having someone that can kind of cycle those two positions other than Dean Wade would be great.
So I was gonna throw a name at you.
Okay,
They have a
go for
couple
it.
roster spots open. A lot of wings here, so I don't know if he fits in or gets minutes, but he might even be a training camp deal guy at this point, given what we've seen with Lonnie Walker and some others. Does O'Shea Brissett make sense here?
I'd be into it. I don't think that they're going to do another minimum signing. Like, I think if there is a roster shakeup at this point, it would be a trade. I think the most likely guy would be Karis LeVert if you kind of read the tea leaves. Jalen Tyson was kind of brought in to be that Karis LeVert successor. So if they're able to move LeVert and address, the 4-5 or the 4-3, I think they would go ahead and do so. That isn't reporting. That's just kind of guesses based on the reporting that's out there.
And he was on the Celtics killers list as well, by the way.
Yeah, he's been good for you against you guys for sure. But I do think they'll look at opportunities throughout the season. But the big wing thing for me is so much more tied to playmaking. Like I
Yep.
think they need front court playmaking.
That's why I'm
rather than
excited about
defense.
Tyson. I think he can bring a little bit of that.
Right. And he's someone that played a lot of points in college, or at least that last year he certainly did. That's what they need, man. Like too often when you look at the Cavs of the last couple of years, it's been so rigid in terms of these guys are play initiators, these guys are play finishers. That's not how you win. I think teams around the league should look at Boston and how they had guys that could create and initiate offense at every single position. That makes it so much harder for defenses when you got to bring two to the ball. That ball can rotate and then someone else is able to initiate from the weak side or whatever the case may be. Cavs need guys that do more. And I think when you look at the starting lineup, they obviously have that with Garland and Mitchell. I think Mobley and Allen have shown enough as a playmaker. Strus had his best playmaking season. I think that works. But having those guys that can step in off the bench and keep that going, that's going to be so crucial. So I do think that's one of those spots where Jalen Tyson is intriguing. Obviously, Karras can do that at times, but whether or not they have enough playmaking to kind of combat the type of defenses they're going to see in the playoffs, that remains to be seen.
Well, again, what your prediction is for them this season. We'll get on to some Celtics talk. Want to give a shout out to Prize Picks. It's the perfect time of week to get in on Prize Picks. Ton of football games going on. And tomorrow, as we record this ahead of Sunday, they're offering again 1 Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week this September. All you need is 1 yard. You only have 55 week 1, but that's still more than 1. So 4 weeks of free wins essentially with Caleb Williams there. Don't miss this deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. What's Prize Picks? It's our official daily fantasy sports partner here at CLNS Media. Pick 2 or more players, pick more or less on their stat projections, and you're off. It's that easy. They're America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members, and it's fun. You can mix leagues. You can try a bunch of different leagues and players. And in the football case, you don't have to go full season with a fantasy team. CMC, Christian McCaffrey's already down for me. I can move on and grab someone else with Prize Picks here the next week. So go download Prize Picks and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play 5. That's code CLNS. You can get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. And it's still summer in my heart, Justin. There's still a lot going on in terms of concerts, events, baseball games. Want to get to one more baseball game before the season ends, even though my Sox aren't going to make the playoffs here at this point. So I'm using Game Time, going to a concert next Wednesday, going to a game later this month, and their seat selection process is so great. You can see where you're sitting. They have the lowest price guaranteed, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference, all in pricing, and flash zone deals, all kinds of fun stuff like that over there. It's such a great experience over on their app. So go over there right now, download it, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off your first ticket purchase over there. What time is it? Game Time. Let's move on to the Celtics. But first, in your mind, Justin, where is this Cavs team going to finish this year if all goes right?
I think from a standing standpoint, I kind of expect them to be in the 2-3 mix. The other team I have there is kind of the Knicks, and if the Knicks stay healthy, I'd probably give them a nod to be the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. But obviously, that's a big question. Mitchell Robinson typically does miss a lot of time, and they don't really have a backup 5. I don't think Precious Achiuwa necessarily works as the full-time 5, and Julius Randle. Tibbs has been very hesitant to play him at the 5, and I think a lot of that is tied to his lack of ability to defend the rim and do those responsibilities defensively. OG typically misses 40 games a year, and I just think that the Cavs have a little more depth than them, at least when it comes to being able to insulate themselves defensively. Even with Mobley missing as much time as he did last year, they were able to still have a very good defense. So. I think that they're going to be in that 2-3 mix, and it's likely going to come down to health, which one of those seeds that they get. And, that gives them a good chance, I think, to compete, to get to an Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think anybody's beating Boston. I think if someone were to upset Boston in the playoffs, it would be because they kind of goaded Boston into beating themselves. I think even when you look at the last couple of years, the times that Boston has lost, they lost to themselves. I think, when they lost to the Warriors, they lost to themselves. When they
Yeah.
lost to Miami, they lost to themselves. That would probably be the recipe, a cold shooting series and Boston just kind of killing themselves with their own mistakes. I think the Cavs could probably extend a series against Boston. They came very close to forcing a game 6 with that game 4 that came down to the wire, even without Mitchell and Allen. But I still think Boston is, as I said, in a tier of their own and the favorite to repeat this season.
Yeah, what are you interested in seeing with them? Obviously, Porzingis is going to miss significant time to start the year, so you're going to see some interesting center play from some depth guys there, which is top on my mind. There is that hangover thing. Is it going to be a burst after a championship into next year like it was in 2009 for this team? Or is it going to be, we're stepping back in, a lot of guys playing the Olympics, retire, blah, 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 blah. That's, I think, the 2 biggest things to watch with them, along with maybe some of the depth guys. Can they repeat what they did last year? Some guys who are entering their 30s or going deep into their 30s in a couple of players' cases. So there's not a lot of questions here, because if they do what they did last year, like you said, they're in a league of their own. They've mastered both ends of the floor in terms of the way they want to play. Everybody's back effectively here other than Brissett. So there aren't a lot of questions. It makes it tough to nitpick this team and try to find some things to talk about. But there's a few things. What are you most interested in with them?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at last year, they largely won without Porzingis, at least when it came
Yeah,
to the playoffs, and
right.
they were great in the regular
31
season
and
without him.
6.
Yeah, so I think that's obviously a big question, but I think that they've shown enough resiliency to show that they can navigate it. We'll need to see, how much older does Al Horford look? I think that's going to be a big factor, but they've got some nice depth there. I think that they're going to be able to navigate that well. to me, Boston is like dueling cliches, right? Is it going to be, championship hangover and, the disease of more with a bunch of guys that sacrifice to largely win their first championship or second in the case of Drew Holiday? Are they still going to make the same sacrifices for one another and play as a team, or is competing interests and the whole individuality, is that going to be an issue, or are they going to take an off season where probably the first champion that I can remember basically in my entire time watching the NBA where they won a championship and its best player didn't improve kind of his standing in the league. Like the fact that Jason Tatum, like normally when someone wins a championship, everyone is like, okay, the best player on the team is now either the best player in the league or he's top three or like lock for a top five. That's not the case for Jason Tatum. Like
Did he prove himself to you?
You know, I don't think he improved his standing for me, and maybe that's because I was already pretty high on Jason Tatum. Like I knew he could be the best player on a championship team already. I think this was the right environment for him. But when you look at kind of the how the Olympics went for him and the offseason of slander, I think there's a lot of fuel there for Boston to feel like we still have something to prove. We can still go out and let's punch the league in the mouth and win another championship. Like I think that there's a lot of that there. But there is the as I said before, the other side of that coin, which is all right. Well, like, is everyone going to sacrifice at the same level? Jaylen Brown didn't like congratulate his teammates on winning an Olympic medal. Is there going to be bad blood there? I don't think that's going to be the case. I would expect them to still kind of have a chip on their shoulder and use this all as fuel. But that's going to be interesting to me. And I think the part that doesn't get talked about enough is, championship hangover is one thing, but when you stack an Olympics on top of that, it might just be that physically taxing where they run out of gas. Like I think that happened to the Denver Nuggets last year with Jokic and those guys playing in the World Cup and the impact that had. Like I think that team kind of was just low on fuel, and we'll see if that's the case for Boston. But the convenient thing for them is they have so much depth that I don't think that they have to be overly taxed in the regular season. And I guess I'm interested in seeing how Joe Mazzulla approaches the regular season.
Yeah, and we talked about it the other day, Jalen, Jason, their approach is going to set the tone here because the role guys mostly do what they need to. You're
Right.
pretty confident in those guys being able to do their jobs at the very least. These guys set the tone with their defensive intensity. Their passing reached another level. They cut all those turnovers out from the run 2 years ago, which was so important for both of them. That's a focus thing. That's a consistency thing for both of those guys. Shot selection, you always talk about that with them. And those all reach heights. So these guys improved. They obviously have the best cast you could imagine around them. But especially it's this year, right? But it's also the year after this where maybe you start moving some pieces, things get expensive. What I keep saying over and over again is, right, you put them in the perfect environment to succeed last year. That environment's pretty much carrying over here. Now, what steps are those guys going to show to prove that they can carry this into the future? Because they're, not many teams can have two supermax guys. Now you have two supermax guys, and they need to be able to perform on that level. Tatum's case, what's the focus on winning an MVP, becoming an MVP level kind of guy? I think the biggest bridge he has to gap there is showing that he can be a guy who raises up his teammates level, a la LeBron and some of these great playmaking wings who we've seen at that position. For Jalen to being that efficient passer and that dominant defender that we saw during the run there. And if those guys can continue to do that in the future, that's what it's going to take to be able to sustain this. Because in 2 years, Porzingis is probably going to be gone. I mean, he might just be gone with injuries at this point anyway, given how his career's gone. Drew's 35 this year. Al's 38 this year. These have been critical guys for them on this run. Even White's 30. So this is going to become less and less each year about that supporting cast and more about, Brown and Tatum as a duo, as playmakers, all this stuff able to carry this team into the future because they're going to have to as they go into a little bit of a transition. Not this year, but probably more next year.
Yeah. And this ties into the Cavs approach. As much as people talk about, moving on from Jared Allen or whatever the case may be, you got to make sure that you're maintaining that all-star level talent. And, if a move comes available where you're able to make a lateral move that but helps from a fit standpoint, you do it. But currently, you maintain that talent you have. Hang around. Like I think that is going to be the approach when you have this league with more parity.
Yeah, cut your
Where
break.
it just comes to, are you in position to capitalize if things break your way, right? Like the 2019 Raptors should have never won a championship, but with the breaks that they caught along the way, like that's they put themselves in position to capitalize on that, and we have seen that in the past. So from
Most
Cleveland standpoint,
champions catch breaks, and the Celtics caught a lot, but that's why I didn't get the all easiest run ever thing with them.
yeah, I would still say the 2015 Warriors got that easiest run. I think that starting point guard for every single team along the way goes down, and then obviously Kevin Love in the finals. I'm going to go with that as the easiest run.
Yeah, the
Um,
Mavs are pretty healthy.
yeah, you gotta. Yeah, but the Mavs caught breaks in my opinion to get there. Like I
Right.
don't think that team should have made the finals in a normal scenario. But from Cleveland's standpoint, I think that's the key. Just be patient, find your opportunities to make moves to make yourselves better. I just never believe in losing talent and like getting worse as a team to fit an archetype. And I think that is kind of the biggest thing. Like when people talk about like moving Garland for like a Devin Vassell, like that's still, a 6'5" guard that doesn't provide playmaking.
I do
That's
like
going
his
to
game, though.
I like Devin Vassell too, but you're still going to be an undersized team at that point because what do the Cavs have like an unlimited supply of? 6'5" players. And that's what Devin Vassell is with zero playmaking juice. And he's an average 3-point shooter and an okay defender. Like that's not going to move the needle. And that would put too much of a burden on Donovan Mitchell to be a playmaker who, we've never seen a heliocentric offense, really win a championship. Like even with LeBron, there's at least Kyrie or Wade or someone to kind of take that burden off. Like there's another playmaker in the mix. Luka, they added a playmaker to him in Kyrie, right? Like Donovan is not Luka's caliber. He's not on Russell Westbrook's caliber as a playmaker when you look back to that MVP season in OKC. So I think it is very important to keep playmaking all around him and make his life easier because that 11-3 stretch that they had with just Mitchell and Allen, they didn't play a ton of games on that stretch. They played almost no teams with a winning record, but that took such a physical toll on Mitchell and all of those guys. Like Mitchell's obviously had the knee injury that didn't go away for the rest of the season. Strus had a knee issue. LeVert had a knee issue. Wade got worn down to the point that his season was effectively over. Like that, like killed the team. You need to maintain that depth and you need to maintain that playmaking.
Yeah, Celtics pretty healthy on their run other than the Porzingis injury there. And, of course, he wasn't available for that Cavs-Celtics series either there. So that bodes well to, what they're able to do without him this year. I want to get into one more topic with you, a pretty timely news story that came out yesterday. But first, want to let people know about Nutrafol. Nutrafol right now offering $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping. That's a great offer. You see a lot of these offers we're throwing out there. It's about as good as it gets. And as we transition into fall and our schedules get busier, mine, of course, in 10 days, about to get pretty busy. Back to school activities for your kids, if that's your thing, tighter work deadlines or the start of holiday preparations. It's easy to forget about taking care of ourselves. And that's a big thing with your hair. Are you interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, longer? Well, effects around your life and things you eat, hormones, aging, stress, metabolism. It's all about whole body health. And Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. It's different for men and women, so a one size fits all approach to hair growth doesn't cut it. Nutrafol has multiple formulas for men and women that are tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors to get you what you need. And with a Nutrafol subscription, building hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no subscription required, automated deliveries, and free shipping. Again, that's a big one there. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults and Headspace membership is included. Get results you can run your fingers through. So for a limited time, they're offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and use the code GARDEN. Find out why 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, Nutrafol.com, promo code GARDEN. Nutrafol.com, promo code GARDEN. So this came out yesterday, Justin. Want to get your thoughts on it. New York Post reporting, obviously the Celtics went up for sale pretty quickly after the finals win there. Weird story, shocking story. Probably thought that they were going to have to sell this team eventually, but not this soon. And obviously there was some reporting earlier this summer that Wick, the front-facing owner of the group here, only owned about 2-3% of the Celtics. It was his father who, was the big money behind the team here. And Irv Grousbeck effectively said that's it in terms of the spending here, in terms of all these extensions and luxury tax hits that they're about to take on. And right from the start, I was like, this is a big deal. Like, this ownership group spent a lot of money to get this championship here, spent a lot of money to keep all these players on board as they're going to have this season and beyond. So now you don't know who's going to own this team into the future. There's been a lot of wacky rumors. None of them seem to be, substantiated here. And in this reporting here, Celtics barely broke even last year and, on the verge of losing $80 million in terms of the money they have on the books here. Don't own their arena, so they're losing some money there. So they're in a weird money spot. And we always were like, all right, are they going to be able to spend to keep this team together here? And they did. But now you're asking, all right, can they actually pay the money it's going to take to keep this team together? And who's going to pick up this bill here? Because it's clearly not going to be the Grousbecks. Could this be a issue for them as they try to sustain this run here? Because we don't know who the owner is going to be.
I think it's an issue for every team. Like, I think this is the new reality we're in. Like, Steve Ballmer just let Paul George walk for nothing. Like,
Right.
I think that should be, the 5 alarm fire to fans that lets you know that, it's we're in a different era. Bobby Marks has talked about how teams are going to have to take a 2-5 approach, where if you're in the second apron, you're in for 2 years, you're out for the other 3 years of a 5-year span. Otherwise, you start getting into those, ridiculous penalties that you're going to hit.
And the Celtics are there next year after this. It's going to be like $500 million combined between tax and salaries.
Right, and I think that's part of why the Cavs have been strategic, and that's probably been the biggest holdup when it comes to, like an Isaac Okoro extension. If he does take the qualifying offer, I think they would be in the luxury tax, but not the first apron. I think they want to avoid starting that repeater clock until they have to. I think after this coming season, that's when the Cavs are going to, jump up, whether that's, first or second apron. That's when, the Mobley extension is going to kick in. That's when, they're going to be a more expensive team. And I think they understand that, but they want to avoid starting that repeater clock as quick, for as long as possible, and then kind of sprint over. And whether that's, at that point, after this coming season, you're going to have 2 more years of Donovan Mitchell's, current extension. I think those are going to be the 2 years where they try to be in that second apron, right? Delay a little bit, make Boston, be more expensive. Other teams are going to be in a similar kind of spot. And then you hope that those 2 years are your window. And then, honestly, they're going to have a decision to make regardless at that point, because it's going to come down to, do we want to extend Donovan Mitchell for ages like 31 through 35 as someone that has had, his body break down a fair bit the last few years and is a little undersized at the shooting guard position. So, I think this is reality for all teams. They're going to have to figure out, all right, who are our essential guys and can we find value in the margins? And I think whether you're the Celtics, whether you're the Warriors, whether you're the Clippers, whether you're the Cavs, that's going to be forcing teams to make some really tough decisions, no matter who your ownership is or what position you're in. So I think your assessment earlier about, Porzingis or some of these other guys not being on the Celtics in a year or two is probably accurate, because teams are going to have to make those tough decisions. And it's going to come down to whether or not they find the value in the margins, whether they hit on their draft picks or find some undrafted guys or, second draft opportunities, stealing guys from other organizations. That's going to be really, really important. But, if you're Boston, you have to feel really good about winning back-to-back championships here and being contenders. So I think, from a financial standpoint, it's certainly worth it.
Yeah, they might have had the last super team effectively here, if that's what you want to call it, because they got in before these penalties went into effect, and now they have to figure out how to manage these guys. You mentioned George leaving. That's probably what it's going to be for them in my mind as I start to think about how this is going to come apart here. But there'll still be that $500 million bill with Porzingis' last year on his deal there that they have to contend with there. The extended Holiday, is he still a guy who has value at that point that you could move off of and actually get some value back for? Or are you going to be forced to, here we are again, split up the Jays to make the money work here? Those are going to be questions that they have to face in just a year from now, I think. So it's tough. And the Cavs did the same thing, right? They extended everybody, kept everybody, and now you have to figure out how to make that work once the penalties come.
Yeah, I mean, the one benefit for them is, when they extended these guys is incredibly important because, Darius Garland, when you look, I think if you look at the reported contract, it's like 36 million or something like that. Like people refer to that as a max, but like that's nothing, right? Like that's almost like Drew Holiday money. That's OG Anunoby money. Like in that,
Porzingis is 30, yeah.
right,
Even
right.
Holiday, I think his money, if he stays who he is going to age pretty well.
Yeah, like, and Mobley signed his kind of fun max. So I think unless he wins Defensive Player of the Year this year, it's not going to kick into that kind of excessive category. And then Jared Allen is on one of the best contracts in the NBA, and this extension, I think, if he would have waited to hit free agency, I think he would have got a lot more because in 2 years, when it jumps up to that 30 range or whatever. Like that's what Hartenstein is currently getting, and the cap's going to be higher at that time, right? Like, so that's going to be, I think I saw like reports of it being like 15, 16, 17% of the cap. That's nothing, man. Like if you're getting like borderline all-star production at a guy for 15 to 18% of the cap, that's such a benefit. And, if a trade opportunity doesn't come along to make, resolve fit issues or whatever, that's a guy you can still play 28 minutes at like that salary and still feel pretty good about it. Like if you're closing games with Mobley at the 5, you can do that. But I think in the meantime, thoroughly exploring whether or not this current iteration of the Cavs can work better with a better scheme and with internal growth and development. They brought in a ton of player development coaches and guys that are very, very, have strong reputations, whether it's Johnny Bryan, Jordan Ott, et cetera. Like, I think thoroughly exploring that as an option was the correct way to go.
We'll keep tabs on this story. Obviously, it's going to be interesting to see who emerges as owners here, potential owners, Steve Pagliuca in the mix, but no one beyond that for now. The Globe's saying that they're still trying to assess what the value of the team's going to be here at this point, but definitely go check out that New York Post report. Some interesting information out there on where the Celtics sale stands. As for the Celtics and Cavs, they're going to face off November 19th in an NBA Cup game in Boston, and then quickly in Cleveland on December 1st before 2 games later in the year. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to see what the Cavs do. I can't give up on this team. I'm a strong believer in them. And I do think they gave the Celtics a little bit of a run in that series while they were healthy. So we'll see what they're capable of this year. I always love talking about these two teams with Justin Rowan. Check out the Chase Down podcast and check him out on Twitter at Cavs Onida. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me.